Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce of Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys, a former D1 Hooper and high school coach, current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids. Omari, your mic's not working. If you're watching with us live right now on YouTube, just a little bit of technical difficulties. We will get Omari going in just a second. You're muted now.
How's that?
There we go. All right, let's try this again. And hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce of Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys, a former D1 Hooper and high school coach, current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
I'm Omari Sankofa II, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. But the guy you're all here to see today or listening on the podcast is the man himself, Keith Smith of Spotrac, the Front Office Show, one of the best podcasts out there. I listen to it daily with Trevor Lane, and former contributor at Celtics blog. I know that Keith has now moved on from that. But Keith, welcome back. I think this is like the 3rd or 4th time you've joined either Motor City Hoops or the Pistons Pulse now.
Yeah, I think so. It's going to be something like that for sure. I think I feel confident to call myself a friend of the show now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you are willing to call yourself a friend of the show, we would love to be able to give you that designation. We were talking about before, man. I'm hoping so much, Keith, that you make it to Summer League, because I would love to, meet you in person and watch a game for a little bit, whatever. I know Omari and I have talked about that as well. So we got a lot to get to. And so we're going to get right into this. The first thing I want to ask about, Keith, the Pistons laid out the red carpet for Monty Williams, more so laid out a bunch of money for Monty Williams. I've heard your take on this from your podcast, but can you give our listeners, our followers, kind of some insight into what your initial reaction was?
Yeah, I mean, my initial reaction was obviously shock, right? At just the length and the size of the contract. I was like, because I want to say the initial started out at like 70 million. And then there was like, every report was like, they added like a year and then like $10 million on. And it was finally like in the end, it's like, holy cow. But if you're the Pistons and you felt that confident that Monty Williams was your guy, good for them for going to get him, right? There's no salary cap on coach hires. There's nothing that's going to block you from going and paying a ton of money to a coach. So if I was a Pistons fan, I would feel very happy and confident in my ownership group that they said, green light, go get him. That's the guy. Even if we got to pay, $13 million a year or whatever it ends up working out to be. So I think that part of it's really good. Now on the court, it's a good coach, right? I think a really good coach. I think he did a nice job with some weird Pelicans teams back in the day. And then I think he did a really good job with that Suns team as they kind of built into prominence very, very quickly there around. Obviously there was the Chris Paul trade helped quite a bit in that first jump up, but then getting Kevin Durant and, even last year, I know they fell short and they fell out of the playoffs, but that I think was a lot to do with injuries and a lack of depth and other things. So yeah, I think this is a really good hire. And I think last thing I'll say on it is really interesting with the length of the deal, because that signals there's probably some patience here, right? That it doesn't have to be a, playoff team contender within, 2-3 years. And, those things that so often kind of, turn these coaching hires sideways, where if they don't have immediate success, it goes the other way. I think it was really cool that they went the full length of the deal to give this time to say, hey, if it takes a couple of years to build this up, that's fine, and then we'll move forward from there.
Keith, that was going to be my next question, just how unique this deal is, not just from a money standpoint, but from a length standpoint. And I think we all agree Monty's a great coach. Obviously, 2022 Coach of the Year. We saw what he did in Phoenix and Detroit, to the similar position that Phoenix was in 4 years ago, which I think is a big reason why Pistons ownership felt so strongly about it. Just what do you think about the Pistons kind of zagging here when we've seen just the coaching turnover this summer, and it seems like every 2 or 3 years we get a summer where it's just like a complete bloodbath for coaches. But they had Stan Van Gundy for 4 years. They had Dwayne for 5, and now they've committed to Monty for a minimum of 6, and up to 8. I guess kind of what do you make of this strategy? And there's always debate about how much coaches can impact the end result. Just what do you think this means for the Pistons long term to have somebody like Monty in town for as long as they've committed to him?
Yeah, I think in general, NBA teams use the coach spot because, again, there is no salary cap related. There's no dead money that harms your roster building or anything like that. As like that becomes almost the scapegoat. It's the old saying, right? It's easier to fire the coach than it is to fire all the players, right? So you just fire the coach and move along. And I think NBA teams have gotten less and less patient over the years. I think it's turned into most coach contracts are 4 years in length with maybe an option for a 5th year. And if you're not a playoff team by year, the end of year 2, they're already kind of, all right, what's going on here? And if you're not a contender or really stepping forward by year 3 and 4, they're going to make a change. It's that's just kind of the way these things go now. So I think what happens in this case is, like I was saying, this is a lot of patience now. You've basically said, hey, we got 6 years to sort of figure things out. And if it takes 2 years to start really moving in the direction we want, that's okay, because we still have 4 more years on the back end after this to really build it out from there. So, super unique. The last 6-year coaching deal I can remember was Brad Stevens when the Celtics hired him from Butler. And that was part of that was Stevens said, hey, if I'm leaving this college program that I built up, I need security, right? I'm not going to come in to what was supposed to look like it was going to be a multi-year rebuild. And they ended up rebuilding much quicker than that. But it was like, I'm not coming to just come and get fired in 2-3 years because you lose patience with the process. So I think this is a definitely a unique deal. And, we'll see how it all plays out. But, this is, I would feel very happy and excited if I was a Pistons fan about getting this hired, not just because he's a good coach, but just what it signals for the franchise as a whole and where they may be headed over the next few years.
All right, Keith, before we get into specifics and we ask you about possibly trading for Jaylen Brown or Grant Williams, or I know you've done your NBA draft stuff and we have a lot of questions. The listeners are really interested to get your thoughts on some of these prospects we've been talking about. So we'll get to all of that. I want to get your big picture view of the Detroit Pistons right now, the roster, the salary cap. They have number 5 pick. They have number 31 pick. They have some vets. They have some young guys. Just where do you see this team? Where's the salary cap? How could the new CBA maybe impact anything? Maybe it doesn't impact them with where they're at. Just can you give us the airplane view of the organization in your eyes?
Yeah, I think despite the fact that it was such a rough season last year, and I know it just felt like it was loss after loss after loss, and I guess it kind of was, right? But I think they're in better shape than it maybe feels sometimes, and I think that's easy for me to say. I'm not as close to it, right? So those losses don't impact me the way they do a Pistons fan. But I think it is, when I look at the roster as a whole, there's pretty cool roster flexibility, both in terms of contracts and just positions, like the way they play. And a big key to that is Cade Cunningham. I think Cade Cunningham is a guy, I feel, depending on how they build out this roster moving forward, he can play the 1, 2, or 3, right? If you put a bunch of size and shooting around him, he can be your 1, and he can be the guy who's getting you all set up and running everything. If you go with a guard in the way you build out the roster, you slide him up a position or 2, and he can play as kind of a playmaking wing, and I think that's fine too. So I think you're in a really good place because of his versatility in the way the roster can be built out. I think also we're in a spot with Detroit where I like a lot of their players, and it's kind of funny because I have to be very careful to not get so into, man, I like all the pieces, but the sum is not there, right? It doesn't add up the way it should. But like, I think keeping Bogdanovich and Burks was a sign to me that they didn't trade those guys at the trade deadline of, hey, we want to be better next year, right? We want to be more competitive. We want to try to, and I'm not saying go all in on making the playoffs or anything like that, but we just want to be a better team, right? I kind of view them as like, we want to be what the Orlando Magic were this year. Let's play meaningful basketball in March. in maybe even the very beginning part of April. Like, I think that would really be, a good place to be, is a good step forward. Even if you don't make the playoffs, at least you were competitive all the way through. And I think keeping guys like Bogdanovich and Burks, at least for now, that's fine. And those guys, super tradable contracts, they can be moved on at any point. The big collection is, I lovingly refer to it as throw them all in the steel cage and let them, battle it out and figure it out, right? There's 4 bigs there that I think, most people kind of like to varying degrees. And it's, let's see what it looks like. And I think that's fine, for where they are. It's, let that all kind of play itself out. It's, and then obviously salary cap wise, tons of flexibility with the cap. They've got, cap space this summer if they want it. I think they probably will go that direction. So that can be used, obviously to sign guys, or as they've done over the years, eat contracts, or just be a partner in trade and those sorts of things. So those are, that's just having that kind of balance, I guess, is really good for the team. And then they're not facing any super crucial extension deadlines just yet. We're a year out on those things starting to hit, and we'll can probably get into that later as we go. With that, the CBA, I don't think changes a whole lot for the Pistons right now. It's nice that the room exception was bumped up, right? So if they go the cap space route, that is another chunk of spending power that they'll have, and to add to the roster with as they go along. And that could be one too, where that instead of that being $5 million, being about $7.5 million or so, slightly more, that gives you the ability to maybe pick off a value signing that somebody who's kind of just sitting there, tier 3 or 4 free agent, but you can get into it. So I think they're in a really good place. Obviously the lottery was a huge bummer, right? That you fell as far as you could fall. That part of it stinks, but I do think that they're in a interesting spot. In the draft, they're gonna have a lot of options there. They in a spot where I wouldn't be surprised if maybe that's not a spot where teams are looking to trade up to, and those sorts of things. So just all around, I get it, right? 17-win team. It's hard to be super duper excited, but I think they're in a much better place than I think people would look at on its face.
And kind of leaping off of that, and you alluded to it earlier as well, just to be in this position of flexibility. And, they're in year 3 of a rebuild. Last season, I don't think anybody expected 17 wins after winning, I think, 23 and 22 the 2 years before. So, maybe there's some answers from the fan base, and maybe the front office too is thinking, do we need to, make a bigger swing to be competitive next summer? But just from a flexibility, being able to, I guess, pick your own journey sense, how good is it to be in that spot, especially in a year like this where maybe free agency is not quite, giving you what you need to make that leap?
Yeah, it's funny, right? They're not in the position cap space was. They have a good chunk of cap space, but it's not like years past where I think maybe even last year we talked, or the year before. I know Bryce and I have talked it where it's like, they could go get 2 max free agents and those kind of things. They're not really sitting in that kind of spot right now. I think I project them to have right around 30 million in space. So that's not, you're not getting a James Harden or Kyrie Irving in that spot. Not saying that's the direction they should go or would go anyway, but that's not the worst thing in the world, because that's kind of it for probably max free agents in this class. Everybody else is a tier or 2 down from those 2 guys. So I think what you're looking at here now, if you're the Pistons, is let's get into a place where we can go get a couple guys, right, to kind of flesh out our rotation, or somebody comes free via trade that we didn't expect. Now we can maybe jump on that guy and get him there. That's how I think you use that cap space more than the whole let's go out and spend it all on one big free agent and go, because I don't know that one big free agent really exists this summer, at least in a way that makes sense for Detroit.
All right, let's talk draft just a little bit, Keith, and then that'll help us flush out some of the other potential moves that come around, whether it is the free agency route or a trade route and those type of things. So this is from Jonathan Strong, and I'm not going to ask you to actually rank them, Keith, but he asked, can you rank Miller, Amin, Jarris, Camisar, Hendricks? You don't have to rank them, but just based off what you've done, Keith, where are you at with the Pistons at number 5? Let's assume the big 3 are off the board in Miller, Scoot, and Wemby. Who do you think really fits into this roster? And then we can build from there with what may happen the rest of the season.
Yeah, and I think that's a good list of guys. there, obviously, right? Being realistic and who could be there. I don't think Miller will be there, but I do have Miller as the top guy of that group, but I'm very high on Cam Whitmore. I think he's going to be very, very good. I like that he plays with force. I guess is the best way to put that. He gets where he wants to be on the floor. He's not a super duper athlete, but he's a good enough athlete that I don't, think it's going to be, anything that's going to hamper him. But he's just a smart player who knows what he wants to do. I think the shot will continue to improve and get better as he goes. So I really like him. The Thompson twins are it's so hard to evaluate them, right? Because it's, it's like this is as close to a throwback to kids coming out of high school as we've had in years, because they're just, some of the tape is like, I don't even know what I'm watching here, right? Because they're like 4 steps and they're to the rim because they're playing against dudes who looked like me in high school.
Yeah.
Better than me, obviously. I was not very good. But they, so that's a little tricky. Drace, I think, is going to be a good player too. I think he's the kind of guy I think you plug in the rotation on day one and you feel pretty good about him doing a lot of different stuff. And then Hendricks is interesting. I've seen him play a lot because I live in Orlando. So I've seen him play a lot at UCF. You just going to have patience. You're not going to get him day one, kind of stepping right in and doing a lot of stuff, because I think he may think he can, which is a little scary. But he needs work defensively. He gets a little bit lost off the ball. He doesn't, I think it's just going to take him a little while to catch up there. And then offensively, it's going to be playing in a system that's not totally tailored to him, no pun intended, with that. But it's, let's see, how he does in that kind of situation where it's not, just him kind of, all right, I got the ball and I'm going to make every decision and take every shot if I want to. It's going to have to be, how do I fit in that spot? But, and I want to go back just real quick on the Thompson twins. I think they're both going to be pretty good. I just think that neither one of them can shoot, and that part's really worrisome for me. I am more than ever convinced if you can't shoot in the NBA, you better be super special at the other things you do. And it's going to be really hard if you're a wing or a guard that can't shoot, because there's no just go stand near the rim and throw it up to them, right? Plays like those don't necessarily exist. So, I think they're going to be good players. I just think, again, patience is going to take a little bit. And the one other concern I have with them is, unlike, it feels like they're kids coming right out of high school, but these guys are already in their 20s. Like, that part's a little like, that's, I don't know how much more physical, improvement they're obviously going to fill out and, build up their muscle mass, but I don't know that you're going to, bank on some of the physical improvement you see sometimes from these guys who are, 18, 19 years old coming in.
Keith, this is a Cam Whitmore friendly pod, so it's good to get you on the Cam Whitmore train. I think
love him, man. I love him. He just can play. Like, I know that sounds like stupid buzzwords, but like, it's so true. Like, he just knows what he's doing out there.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people get into the debate, especially when you're a team like the Pistons, who are kind of seemingly at a crossroads, right? Like, are we going to go for it next season or continue to kind of slow roll this? I think Cam's seen as a lot of people as like the upside swing, and I think Amin Thompson gets some of that as well. I guess when it comes down to your draft philosophy, especially for the Pistons at 5, and essentially a 3-person draft, really a 1-person draft from their perspective, but 3. I guess where do you kind of fall on that? Maybe taking a guy like Cam, who's younger and has some works to work out. His playmaking obviously is an improvement area, versus a guy maybe like a Jarris or a Taylor Hendricks, where you can look at him and clearly see maybe a pretty high floor as a role player, but maybe some question marks as far as if they can get to that next year.
Yeah, I think if I was running the Pistons, I would say everything I'm doing right now is, can they play with Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey?
Yeah.
And if they can, then that's good, right? If I have question of, all right, player X can really fit with them, and player Y, I'm not so sure that's a great fit, and everything else is the same, I'm going with the guy I think can fit, right? I tend to take the best player available, unless you're like at the end of the first round and it's like, man, what we really need is a guy who can really fill up the shot sheet and knock down shots. Then that's fine. Go draft your designated shooter. That's fine. But when you're picking in the top 20, I'm a big best player available guy because just NBA rosters, this is not, you're not building a 10-year roster here, right? So drafting for fit always seems a little silly when it's, a guy could be off the roster by the time the next draft rolls around. So I'm big on take the best player available. But with that in mind, I want to make sure, can they play alongside those two guys? Because those are my two building blocks, right? Moving forward. And that's not to knock like Jalen Duren or any of those guys, because I think, he can be a part of that right now. I'm just not as I'm not. If there isn't, but if there was like another knockdown, like perfect center spot there, nobody screams on the Pistons like that's the guy that I would not draft another center. Now I know people are probably like, what are you talking about? And it's not even in the mix, right? Because it's not even a thing. There's not a guy in that range for them that would make sense. But yeah, I really do. I think Cam Whitmore would fit really well. I think the other guys, I have a little bit more question, especially someone like Amin Thompson. I think there's a lot of similarities to Cade Cunningham there. And I worry about with the current big mix, that puts an awful lot on Jaden Ivey to become a absolute, he's got to hit 40% from three, or you're not going to build a functional offense. Like you're going to struggle to score points way too much if you went that direction.
So as Omari said, we're a Cam Whitmore friendly podcast here. So we're going to stay in this world after this short break. And we had some questions about Grant Williams, Jeremy Grant. Those are two really nice names if you did draft Cam Whitmore. So after this short break, we'll come back and we'll dive into what could they do in free agency, trades, those type of things. Let's say they drafted Cam Whitmore. We'll talk about that right after this.
All right, Keith, we're back with segment 2. One more draft question from me, and then I'll see if we can maybe get into some free agency stuff. Even beyond those, the 5 that we talked about here, I think another guy, to me, he's kind of been lost in the shuffle a little bit. Anthony Black. Do you see him as compared?
We have a quota, Keith, on the podcast. We can't go 30 minutes without talking about Anthony Black. So if we went into free agency, Omari wouldn't have been able to hit that. So that's why we're going with this question. But he is an interesting prospect.
I'm just curious about Anthony Black. When you look, what do you see from him? What do you kind of see his role in the NBA? And is that on-ball guy, or could you see him maybe being that connective wing that a lot of teams are looking for now?
Yeah, I just finished my scout on all the Arkansas guys yesterday. Yeah. So this is a great timing. I kind of tried to watch them all together because feels like there's like 14 dudes on that roster in this draft. I think it's more like 4, but I really like Anthony Black, and I like his. There's more to his on-ball game than I think he has shown fully just yet. I think there were a lot of guards on that our Arkansas team, especially when Nick Smith was healthy and playing. So I think Black got relegated into an off-ball role quite a bit more than probably would. In a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of Jaden Ivey, where Jaden Ivey has more on-ball playmaking ability than I think a lot of people fully recognize. I think he came in with very much this dude's a scorer, and that's what he will be. And that's fine. I think you get, if you were to go the Anthony Black route and put him with Ivey and Cunningham, you've got your perimeter trio hopefully for the next several years set, right? Because I think they can all play together, because I think you get enough shooting out of Black and Ivey that you're in a good spot. Definitely you got playmaking in spades there, right? That's tons of guys that you can just they're making all sorts of plays out of that group of 3. So I really like him quite a bit. And I'll throw you one other name too, just because he's another guy who I think it's probably a little too high at 5, but if they were to do like a trade back situation and pick up additional picks, Jalen Hood-Schifino, I think, is pretty good too. I like his, again, I like that ability to throw him in there. And the only thing that opens all this up is Cunningham and Ivey's ability to play multiple positions and play on and off the ball for Ivey, and then Cunningham's ability to play, really any of the perimeter roles that you could want him in. So, he's another kid that I really like. I think I like guards that are tough. I like guards that aren't afraid to get in there and mix it up a little bit. And I think he's a pretty good player too. Again, probably too high to take him at 5, but I think, if there was any kind of trade back scenario or anything, he's a guy that I think, could be in the mix for them.
So let's just stay in this world. It doesn't matter. It can be Cam Whitmore. It can be Anthony Black, whoever. You're adding another perimeter guard wing where it's Cade, Ivy, and this player, which leaves somewhat of a hole as a bigger wing / forward type player. So Jonathan Strong asks about a guy you've watched a whole bunch of, Grant Williams. And then Nick asks about Jeremy Grant in Portland. That's a name that's obviously very familiar with Pistons fans. I know that's a two-part question, Keith, and I go ahead and you can start with this, whichever one you want, but if you don't mind answering kind of both. I know there's different context around both of those players, but interesting guys to add to this roster in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen Jeremy Grant, what he can do. Now, what I'd be interested to see is Jeremy Grant back with Detroit this time. It's not like he's been gone forever. It was one season. But if he came back, like I think this is a different Pistons team, right? Where it's going to be, hey, you need to seed some of the on-ball reps, right? It can't be, Jeremy Grant has the ball every possession and is making all sorts of plays in that. But I think that's honestly fine because I think what we saw with Jeremy Grant in Portland was a return of his efficiency. Came back up because it wasn't so many off the dribble contested jumpers that he was having to create late in the clock. It was, all right, Dame, Simons, those guys created it for me, and I'm knocking down open ones. And that's good, right? I think he's a very moldable, adaptable player, right? He can kind of fit into whatever you need him to kind of morph into. He can play both the 3 and the 4. I guess for me, I kind of been there, done that, right? I don't think that's the direction I would go in. I also don't think Portland's either going to hit a hard reset this year. If for some reason there was ever, them and Dame came to an agreement of let's go, or they're going to be looking to keep guys like Jeremy Grant on the roster around Dame to kind of flesh it out. And then it's going to be the kids and the draft pick that get traded for other things. So that one, to me, I don't think there's going to be anything there because I think he probably just stays with Portland or moves on to another option. Grant Williams is interesting because I guess my question would be is, what do you see him as if you're the Pistons? Do you see him as a big wing, or do you see him as a big and a smaller big? I tend to think he's more the latter. I think he's like a smallish big. I think his best position is the 4. I think he can play small ball 5 against certain centers, where it's not going to be, beating him up there too much. And especially if you have rebounding on the floor next to him, that's big. His ability to space the floor, especially if he's playing at the 4 or the 5, is huge. When you start messing around with him at the 3, you lose a lot of the things that make him a good player. The switchability doesn't matter as much there, right? Because it's now you're just kind of doing your thing. The ability to bang bodies isn't as big out on the perimeter. That's where he's really good. He's really good at being that kind of annoying defender where he gets up in underneath guys like Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic. And, he's had a lot of success against those guys, which sounds weird because he's like 6'6", 6'7", but that's what he does really well. And then obviously if he's playing at the 3, the shooting just, it's still great to have, but it's not quite as important, right? Because you're playing a different spot. So I guess then I look at it as, all right, well, sure, Grant could definitely make sense. They could use a little bit more shooting. He's a pretty good playmaker too. He's a really smart passer, pretty good screener. But then what does that mean for the other collection of guys on the roster, right? Are we moving on from, a couple of those bigs? Because if we're moving on, then Grant Williams makes a lot more sense. But if we're not, if we're going to kind of throw those 4 bigs into the mix and say, battle it out, fight it out, the last thing I want to do is throw a 5th big into that mix and say, hey, let's muddy this even more, especially when I think there's a good chance some of their better lineups this year, as currently constructed, are probably going to feature Bogdanovich playing like a small ball 4. So then that becomes, all right, where are we going with this? So that almost becomes it's a nice player, but then well, what is the fit? What is the role here? And I'm just not sure it makes sense for the Pistons.
We got a question about Cameron Johnson. He's another player sort of in that big wing / forward, range that the Pistons are likely going to be looking at this summer. When you look at Cam Johnson, and especially being a restricted free agent, in this market, where would you, maybe peg his salary range? And do you see him being a natural fit with the Pistons?
Yeah, so his spot, because he's restricted, if like Detroit or any of the cap space teams are going to try to go get him, I think you're talking probably close to 25 million a year you're going to have to offer, because you just have to overpay restricted free agents. That's the only way to get them. Now, I do think there might be a couple of these cap space teams that are like, hey, Sean Marks, remember that couple year period where you messed with everybody and gave these big offers to restricted free agents and forced teams to match deals and all this stuff? Guess what? The Roosters come home here. We're gonna do our thing now. We're gonna go after you. So I do think there's a chance, because Cam Johnson, again, guy kind of play 2, 3, or 4, depending on what the rest of your lineup looks like. And you know what it is? He's a knockdown shooter. I thought he showed more in the last year off the dribble ability than he had in previous years. And I think that was both an expansion of his role before he got hurt with the Suns, and then just letting him do more once he got to the Nets. It was really kind of him and Mikal Bridges, and then old friend Spencer Dinwiddie of, hey, you guys got to kind of create everything here. We don't have a whole lot left. So I think that became, he really kind of shined there. So that's the challenge, though, is, you're going to have to make the offer so big that the Nets blink. And I don't know that's it. That's all of your cap space. If you're Detroit, right, it would all go to Cam Johnson. I don't think it's the worst idea in the world, because I think he can play. I think he can really fit in, well with the rest of the roster. I don't know that I want to spend all my cap space in one place like that.
All right. Well, we're talking about cap space. This is from Doug McMiniman. What is your opinion about spending on free agents versus facilitating trades for future assets? This is one thing I really wanted to get in with you today, Keith, because you brought it up, 2 years ago. You always use JJ Redick as the example with the Sixers. The 1 year, you can't overpay for a 1 year guy. So if you're Detroit, and again, we can live in whatever world we want, they need some sort of version of upgrades on the wing/forward. Would you do that with a player out there, overpay for 1 year? Or is it the 76ers are trying to reset and maybe you could take on the Tobias Harris contract, if Harden, are there some names out there? Is there something out there? And is it better to do it via free agency or take on in a trade?
Yeah, that's an interesting way to frame that question. I think the 1 year paying for a free agent, I think they're too far away from that. I think if they were a little bit closer, if they had been like, man, we're right in the play-in mix right to the end of the year, and we just didn't get there, then I think you're a lot closer to doing the 1 year, big contract. My team for that this summer is the Thunder. I think they're really, really good. They're also very tight on roster spots. So I think if you wanted to throw $25 million at whoever you targeted as this is our guy for 1 or 2 years, that's fine. Keep it short enough that it doesn't hurt you if it turns sour. But for the most part, you're good. I think Detroit's a little too far away from that. I think the idea of eating a big contract for, in exchange of, kind of doing it because you're like Tobias Harris, you used him as an example there. He's only got 1 year left, so you're probably going to get a minor draft asset out of that. And Philly's a little tied up with what they can trade draft pick wise, but you're probably not getting anything super great out of that where you feel like, man, that's it. We're great now. We got this. They're certainly not going to trade one of their good young players, I don't think. So that turns into, what are we doing with this kind of player, right? Because if you look at the roster right now, like where does he fit, right? Because again, his probably best position at this point in his career is the 4. All right, so now we're taking another one of the 4s out of the mix. Not that he's not better than those guys, but what is that doing for us in exchange for the asset costs? I think I would rather try to do something. I think I saw maybe in the chat, maybe I misread it, but I thought somebody said something along the lines of like, could you trade Bogdanovich and the pick to go get something? Well, you could do that. That to me though, the something better be more than a 1 or 2 year contribution, right? If I'm trading the 5th pick. Yeah, there it is, the Shaedon Sharpe one. That makes more sense to me as a kind of move I would make, because I think Shaedon Sharpe, you could throw him on the roster, contribute for years to come, and that would be a way to go. I don't know that I would do the let's throw a let's do anything with the pick or any one of the player salaries to eat a bigger salary to come in. That's certainly not a direction I would go. I would need paid more than what these teams are probably going to pay, unless you get into a spot where it's a team that's like, man, we got to get out of this super tax, right? We cannot be sitting there. And that's where I think, do you have a conversation with the Warriors about like Jordan Poole, and say, hey, long-term deal. And I know people are kind of down on Jordan Poole right now, but I think Jordan Poole's biggest issue is I think he needs to start. I think we found out this year with the Warriors, Jordan Poole coming off the bench, he's just not good. And I think we've become, how do I say this? I think in the NBA, we've gotten to a place where coming off the bench is not as valued a skill as it maybe should be. Jamal Crawford and Lou Williams made, super long careers out of coming off the bench and being awesome at doing it, because you got to be able to come off the bench, hit the floor, and make an impact right away, when you get out there. And I think Jordan Poole's the kind of guy needs to feel his way into the game a little bit, needs to, see what it's like, get his touches right away and get going. So, that could be a move you could make. You could maybe pick off from the Clippers, if they wanted to get involved with them, 2 rotation players, and say like, hey, all right, our goal now is we want to make a push forward and really be in the play-in mix and maybe beyond if better, then go get a couple guys who can fill rotation spots and help them bring their tax bill down. You could even look at Boston and say, hey, if you're looking to shed Malcolm Brogdon's contract, could there be something there? Those are the kind of teams I'd target versus the kind of more traditional, we're going to eat your bad salary type of situations.
Keith, how do you see this trade market heating up? You have a lot of teams, obviously, that fell short of expectations. And, to me, it seems like whenever you have an offseason where a lot of coaches lose their jobs, a lot of trades usually follow. It seems like there's always a correlation there. Do you think the Pistons could end up being one of those ideal teams that just say, hey, let's maybe just operate as a landing spot? Do you think that the market's trending that way, maybe more toward like a blockbuster trades per se?
Yeah, I do. I think there's a couple factors. One, you mentioned, right? Teams that fell short, for sure. Then I think the other piece is you get into a spot where it is the free agent class is super weak. So you're not getting your major push forward from free agency for a lot of these teams. And a lot of these teams are not even in a position to do that anyway. And some of them are not in positions to do sign and trades because that would trigger the hard cap and make everything else harder on them. So I think you've got that part of it there where the way forward then is to make trades, right? That's going to be the way. And then you have these teams that are dancing around that I call it, it's the second tax apron. I call it the super tax because I think it just makes a lot more sense to call it that way. I think you're going to look at those teams as, I love Derek's question here, New Orleans, Brooklyn, Atlanta, Minnesota, definitely teams like that. Golden State, Clippers, Boston, Milwaukee, maybe even Phoenix potentially. Probably not as much Phoenix just because their money's more tied up in their main guys. But all those teams that are super expensive, look at any one of them, and you may see, hey, we can poach, right? This is a chance to go get a really good, talented player for less than what they're probably worth in trade, and let's go get them as they look to rebalance their cap sheets, because it's going to have to be a thing, for these teams. This is kind of the grace period year for those teams, so they're given 1 year to kind of get your books in order and then go. So I think this is going to be a very, very active trade market with more big names moved in deals that aren't necessarily like the blockbuster, Kevin Durant kind of trade. I think we'll see just several big names, big money players moved as everybody tries to rebalance. Because the other thing too is for those teams that have been way under the cap and lower salaried teams, that doesn't have any benefit this year because not only did they make the penalties of you got to get to the floor, but they made the penalties you won't share in the luxury tax if you don't hit a certain level as well. So the money that gets paid out to other teams, what they're basically trying to do is push everybody into the middle, right? We want you all spending roughly around the same. Spoiler alert, opinion time. It's not going to work because you still are going to have rich ownership groups that are like, I laugh at you and I can just continue to do business the way I've done it. And I think they're going to do some weird, you're going to see some weird contracts that are going to be like, why'd that guy get paid so much? Part of it was they paid him that much to turn him into a kind of walking trade exception, where they can move them later down the line and those sorts of things. But yeah, we're in for a very, kind of interesting, off season from trade standpoint.
Keith, for those that don't listen to the front office show, but should start listening after this, it is no longer the best kept secret in all basketball podcasts.
Appreciate
you guys
that.
Can you explain the super tax, or what you guys have pegged as the super tax? Because
Sure.
some of the listeners may not know exactly what goes into that, what some of those restrictions are going to be, whether it's some of them start this offseason or do any of them start this offseason and then some down the road. But I'll let you explain kind of how that all works and what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think the best way to explain it is they're trying to put handcuffs on the league's most expensive teams. And what they're trying to do with those handcuffs is they're trying to turn it into a spot where they didn't go to a hard cap, which was never going to fly, right? If they had insisted on a hard cap, we'd be headed towards a lockout right now. So what they said was, you can still resign all your guys. So if you're the Golden State Warriors and you've drafted historically well over the years, you can still re-sign everybody, and you're good. But if you are doing that, we're not going to let you re-sign guys and then use the mid-level exception and take on money in trades and sign buyout players and all those sorts of things. Those have all been eliminated. So what happens is this coming season, so about a month from now, when free agency opens, the teams that are above the second tax apron. So what they did was, you've got the luxury tax, you've got the tax apron, that initial one. That's been the one that has historically been, that's where teams get hard capped if they're subject to the hard cap. That's about $7 million over the luxury tax. Then they added a second tax apron. So this is for the most expensive teams in the league. That is $17.5 million over the luxury tax. So it's about 10.5 over the tax apron. Those teams will not have the mid-level exception this year. They just won't have any. So what they will be down to this summer is, we can sign our draft picks, we can sign players to minimum contracts, and we can make trades. And you can make trades in the normal way this year, all the way up through the trade deadline for this coming season. A year from now, as we're going into the summer of 2024, it gets even more restrictive for those super expensive teams. So a couple of things they won't be able to do. They still won't have the mid-level exception. They won't be able to sign buyout players who made more than the mid-level. So, for example, the Kevin Love signing might not have been able to fly to Miami. Now, Miami's not a super tax team, but those kind of signings, you're not going to let the rich get richer at the buyout season. You also will trades become far more restrictive. I think even the most casual fan knows you can take two $10 million players and trade them for a $25 million player, because you're allowed to add their salaries together in a trade, and then you get a little bit of a bump on top of that to go get the player. In the new world, if you're a super tax team, trades have to be dollar for dollar, and you can no longer aggregate players together. So you can't take two $10 million players and go turn them into, a $20 million player. That's not allowed. So you get stuck into a really spot where it is like, all right, trades, it's either we're taking back what we sent out or we're taking back less in that situation. So that becomes a whole other thing there. There's rules around draft picks. If you're a super tax team for multiple years, your draft pick gets dropped to the end of the first round. So you now, hopefully that's not too much of a punishment, because if you're spending that kind of money, you better be picking in the mid to late 20s anyway. But right, you're going to drop to the end of the last round. The other thing it does is it freezes your pick that's 7 years out. So the Kevin Durant trade couldn't have happened because you couldn't have sent, you couldn't have done the aggregating of the salaries together, and you couldn't have sent a draft pick that's 7 years out. And then you got to be out of the tax for a prescribed window before that pick frees back up to be traded. So it gets really, really restrictive on how you're going to build out your roster if you're in the super tax. It's not a hard cap, but I think teams are going to treat it as a de facto hard cap, just because it's so hard to flesh out your depth around your team. You better nail every draft pick you have. Otherwise you're going to be in a really tricky spot.
Well, and that's something the Pistons can maybe take advantage of. So that's what we were talking about, guys. Just wanted to make sure everybody understood that, with the Pistons in their cap situation, they can maybe take advantage of some of these teams that are going to avoid that. We're going to take another short break, and then when we come back, Omari's got some more questions for Keith. I've got some more questions for Keith. We got questions in the chat, so we'll keep throwing them at him until we run out of time here. We'll get right back into it right after this short break.
All right, Keith, we are back with segment 3. Let's take more of a broad view of the offseason just from a salary cap standpoint. Where would you rank the Pistons, I guess, generally, maybe if you did tiers or something like that, just overall flexibility, just to what extent do you think they'll be able to kind of dictate their own future this summer, maybe compare it to teams who are like Golden State, for example, a team that's taxed out? Just where do the Pistons kind of rank, NBA terms as far as how they can dictate things this summer?
Yeah, like you went to the extreme.
Yeah. Opposite side of the coin.
Yeah, right. The Warriors are nowhere near that world. Yeah, I think the Pistons are right in that mix, right? They're going to have almost $30 million in cap space. Maybe they could get to a little bit more. We'll see. I tend to feel pretty good about the players I project them to keep and not move on from. So that puts them in the range with Indiana, Oklahoma City, Orlando, just behind, the main cap space teams this summer, which are like Houston, Utah, San Antonio. Those are the big money spenders, but only 7 teams that I project to have cap space this summer. We'll see. There's a couple of teams that are swing teams that could maybe join them. We could see like the Charlotte Hornets getting that mix, but I don't think they will because they're still dealing with the Miles Bridges situation as well as PJ Washington's free agency. So we'll see. Sacramento, if Harrison Barnes left, they could potentially go the cap space route, but I think it's probably more likely they just retain Barnes and keep a good thing rolling there. So really good flexibility, right? And the Pistons are also in a spot where it's not like they're trying to fill out 12 roster spots either, right? So they're in a spot where you can use that 30 million in space to do some stuff. They've got a couple of veterans in Bogdanovich and Burks that'll have traded value right this summer if they did decide, hey, we didn't trade him at the deadline, but there's a move that's too good to pass up right now. They can go. You've got some positional surplus, I think, at the big spots. That you could move on from somebody there, especially if it's like, we don't know where Isaiah Stewart is going, but we don't feel great about extending him. Maybe you can move on from him while he's still, a positive value player before he's on his next contract. So there's a lot of flexibility, and that's it's never a bad thing to have that flexibility as long as you use it, in a good way. I don't know that it's going to fly to eat a whole bunch of salaries and then just waive those guys as dead money on your books like they did a couple years ago. I think it's going to have to be, hey, get somebody who can either help us right now just be better, or somebody who can really grow forward with the younger core, even if they're not a 22-year-old, even if it's somebody who's 25 or 26. Let's get this thing moving in an upward direction here.
All right, this is from Jonathan Strong. You brought up Bojan. What would you do with Bojan, Keith? And how much does it depend on who the Pistons draft? So we talked a lot about these wing guys, right? Cam, Whitmore, those guys. There's a world where they draft Taylor Hendricks or Jarris Walker, and now there's a little bit more where you could keep playing Bojan at the 3, and there's no young guy there, maybe Isaiah Livers. So I know it depends on the draft a little bit, but big picture, Bojan this offseason, his trade market.
Yeah, I just hang on to him and go into the season with him, barring somebody blowing you away in an offer for him or him needing to be a part of a much bigger trade. I like that one that was suggested about, could the Shaedon Sharpe thing be a thing? If that was on the table, yeah, I'd be all over that. I wouldn't even hesitate. I'm really high on Shaedon Sharpe. So I think we're in a spot where that becomes really interesting to see, where do we go with Bogdanovich, because I think he's a guy who's, unless he shows up and forgot how to shoot, which that hasn't happened to this point, I don't think will, he's going to hold value, right? He's still going to be a guy that you could get and, go move in trade all the way up to the trade deadline. So, I think if the goal is to be a better team and start making real strides forward, it kind of works in the opposite way to trade a guy like Bogdanovich, because I just think he's a really good, helpful player. The other thing, too, is with the young guards, with Cunningham and Ivy, I think where teams make mistakes with those guys is they don't put enough shooting around them. Just not necessarily from a standpoint of to mask their own deficiencies, but just I think what happens with young guards is if I get into the paint, continue like kick it out, and it clanks off the rim, I'm going to stop kicking it out, right? I'm going to start trying to do it all myself. And that's where I think you want to be in a spot where, hey, let's be a little bit, more conscious of giving them options, right? And that's where I think Bogdanovich and Burks, to a lesser degree, come in is I want when my playmakers make the right read to do that. I want, if Jalen Duren and James Wiseman catch it around the rim and kick it out to a shooter in the corner, I want the shot to go in so they feel like they made the right play. Right, I don't want it to be they kicked it out and it was just another one that fell off the rim, or missed badly or whatever. Like you got to have some shooting on the floor, and I think Bogdanovich is a good guy for that. And if you're trying to be competitive, he's a guy you can throw the ball to at the end of the game and say, "Hey, go create something for us."
Keith, we have a question here about Wiseman's future, but we can open it up and get into the three extension eligible players the Pistons have this offseason. Wiseman, obviously, Isaiah Stewart, and then Killian Hayes. I think Wiseman's a little unique given that they just traded for him. But if you're looking at extension ranges for these guys, and obviously there's probably, a lot of gambling, kind of where would you map their value now, or, maybe to what extent do you think the Pistons should be willing to commit?
Yeah, I'll start with the easiest one for me of that group, and it's Killian Hayes. He hasn't done enough for me to extend him. It would have to be so team friendly that it doesn't even make sense for him, right? Because that turns into, hey, I'd rather bet that it all comes together for me in year 4, and then we could go. And that's always from a team's standpoint that's the nice thing about this process for the team. It sucks for the player, but the nice thing is that we still have restricted free agency next year if these guys pop late. So I wouldn't do anything with him. Wiseman, I think, is easier where it's just let's let the year play out because we've got 24 games I think he played for the Pistons last year or something, and they were pretty good. At times, his moments. I think we're seeing dude just needed to play. He needed to play without I had a turnover and looking over at the bench and wondering if I'm coming right out of the game, right? We've seen Monty Williams do pretty good with bigs in the past, right? He got a lot out of James Wiseman, or not DeAndre Ayton, right? So I think he can get a good amount out of James Wiseman. So I'm a fan, and my challenge there is I also really like Jalen Duren. So I don't know, where we're going to land with that. But for now, hey, I got 24 minutes of center play covered, and we'll figure it all out from there. Isaiah Stewart's the tough one, man, because I feel like every good team has an Isaiah Stewart where it's just dude plays with a ton of energy and he's going to hit the boards. He's going to do a lot of stuff. He's really going to get in there and toss dudes around and make things happen and play super physical with that. I think whether it was him or the team, I did not like the whole, hey, let's try to shoot more threes. I thought that went too far last year for him. I mean, it got to be, almost half his shots. I think I might have that wrong. But it was almost half his shots were 3-pointers. That's not, no, we're getting too far away from what makes him good with that. It's fine if it was like, hey, we're going to try this. And then it's like, oh, he's knocking down 37%. That becomes different, but he shot in the low 30s. So it felt like, hey, let's just keep trying it. And it's like, I don't know. So I worry about that, with him. And then that becomes, how much do you pay, an energy big, right? Like, well, what's our number there? And that's where I think for him, it's probably more like we get into a spot where it becomes, all right, we're just going to let it play out too. And, and if you come back and play well, then, we've got restricted free agency to fall into and with that. So I don't think we're going to necessarily see any extensions for those three guys. I think, we're probably headed in a no extension path for them, but kind of all for different reasons.
All right. This is from our guy, Kyle, under data-driven Pistons fans. Can teams trade drafted players after the new league year, but before they are signed to a contract? So, for example, could they draft a player at 5, then wait till they have cap space to package him in a trade?
Yeah, happens all the time. These are the ones I call it hat shenanigans, where you see a guy gets a hat, and then it's like, but there's a prearranged trade that's sending him somewhere, but that trade can't be executed until the moratorium ends in the first week of July. So we see that all the time. There's also the opportunity. Yeah, Detroit could draft somebody and then get into free agency and find out, hey, we really want to trade for. I don't know, Amin Thompson, right? Because he fell to you, and we really, really want him, and we're willing to do this or whatever. That's more likely to happen at the draft than it is, a week or two later when free agency opens up. So I think we're probably more in a spot where we'll see it be, if they're going to do anything with the draft pick, probably happens at the draft. But that is allowed. You can do that. And there's also every once in a while you'll see teams where it's, hey, we need the players. Salary to be in the trade. So what they'll do is they'll sign him, and then you have to wait 30 days. Probably the most famous example of that was Andrew Wiggins got signed and then got traded to Minnesota in the Kevin Love deal to send him to Cleveland. And we all had to sit here and wait 30 days when we all knew Kevin Love was going to be on the Cavs.
I was going to bring up the Wiggins deal as a example of that. I guess with the 5th pick too, like what salary implications does that have for the team? Like I think maybe they were in a lot of the projections were mocked of maybe they get the 1st pick, but they'll probably save a little bit of money. How does that impact their cap space?
Yeah, they do. So that 5th pick comes with a cap hold of about $7.8 million. It's the first year salary plus the 120% because everybody signs for that. That saved them about $4 million on that. Now this is that's great. Thanks. Wow. But glad we didn't get the right. No one cares about $4 million, right? Like that's would rather have had the number 1 pick. But hey, if we're gonna take the positive side and what's done is done. Yeah, the number 1 pick's about 11.9 million. The 5th pick's about 7.8. So a little over $4 million.
All right, another one from Doug McMiniman. Keith, given the Pistons situation, what's the best way to maneuver the new CBA? So I know we've talked a lot about this. You've talked a little bit about how they could take advantage of this for teams that are in that super tax. Is there anything they need to look out for, as hopefully Cade hits a ceiling and Jaden Ivey hits a ceiling, maybe Jalen Duren, what kind of things do they have to be looking to do as hopefully they get better, acquire more talent? What's in there that they got to be cognizant of?
Yeah, you got to be a little bit careful this summer with that $30 million in cap space that you don't sign a contract that goes sideways on you. For example, if there was a free agent that you felt, we just got to have this guy, and he's like 32 years old. He's a little bit younger, but let's say they really, really wanted Harrison Barnes for some reason. And I'm just throwing him out there because he's like a early 30s player. You don't want to give him a contract that is sitting at $35-36 million in that 3rd and 4th years, because now you're into hopefully Cade Cunningham's past the injury, blows up this year, and now you're into a looking into his extension kicking in. By the time that contract would be sitting out there in there, maybe even Jaden Ivey. That's where teams kind of sometimes get themselves in trouble, because then it's, well, we wouldn't got the guy to help lift us now, but then we got to pay our own guys in a couple years down the line. This is the one thing, the NBA calendar moves really, really fast. Like, it seems absolutely insane to me that we're talking about Cade Cunningham has 1 more year left, and then it's extension eligible. And some of that's because of the lost year, right? Like we had that lost year. So I think it's, one of those things where we'll see, where it goes. But yeah, I think it's, they're fine right now. I wouldn't be worried much about the CBA other than just kind of keeping a general eye on that. But I don't think they're going to be in that position to drop $30 million on one free agent anyway. There's nobody who really makes sense to do that with it. If they do, I'm happy to come back and let you know, whether I thought they were right or wrong to do so on a 4-year major money contract. But I don't think that's where that's going to go.
All right, Keith, we got one more for you. We know who you would pick at 5. You mentioned Cam Whitmore. If you want to pivot off of that, perfectly cool. But if you were, let's say you were the Pistons GM this summer, you have this cap space at the 5th overall pick. Kind of what path would you pick, and what would you do in free agency and with that 5th overall pick?
Yeah, first thing I do is I call the Magic and find out if there's a player they super love at 5. Like, did that can I steal 11 from them, right, to move up one spot? Unfortunately, this is not the Magic that Sam Hinkie pulled that on him, a few years ago when it was okay, they really want Elfrid Payton, so I'm going to draft him and then force them to draft my guy and give me an additional first rounder. But I would just see, right, because they have the 2 draft picks. At least it's worth a phone call. So what I would do is, where you're sitting on that $30 million in space, I would see if I could, one of these super tax teams has a player that's, maybe they're going to move on from, just to free things up a little bit. That can either be one player that really fits well and can plug a real need for me. I know people don't love Jordan Poole and don't love the contract, but I think he'd make a lot of sense for this team, just because they need somebody who can put the ball in the basket consistently. And I think he can do that. I think we've seen him do that at a very high level and do it efficiently in the past. And that's even when he didn't have staff. There, because we tend to poo-poo the things the Warriors do while they have staff, and some of that's true, but some of those guys are pretty good, independent as well. So I would look at that, or if Boston was like, hey, what do you think about Malcolm Brogdon? Like, that's only got 2 years left on that contract. It could really help you, this year moving forward. Those would be the kind of things I'd be looking at with my cap space, because there's no free agents that necessarily jump out to me as like, yep, that's the guy. You got to go get him. Or there's not even like 2 or 3 where I'm like, split that $30 million up between 3 guys. There will be, right? There'll be players that's like, hey, that guy's kind of still sitting out there. Playing in restricted free agency. Yeah, if you wanted to throw $100 million offer sheet at Austin Reeves, who I think could really fit well, do it and force the Lakers to match it. I think they will. I think the Lakers will match it. So you need to be ready with, plan B on that one. If plan B was Cam Johnson, go nuts with that too. If that's the direction you want to go. I would like to see them maybe target, get a point guard if you can, like just somebody who can ease the burden on Cade Cunningham a little bit and maybe allow you to play some different looks with him, maybe playing a little bit more as a playmaking forward than necessarily having to be the on-ball creator of all things. But it's just be patient. I guess that's the biggest thing. Like, there's no reason to make crazy all-in moves right now. You're far enough away, but with enough promise that I don't feel like it's like I have to do something today with that. So, and you got the coach now, right? And you have the coach, you're locked into the coach for, years to come. So you can afford a little bit more of a patient approach this summer.
I know we said that was the last question, and you don't have to expand on this at all, Keith, but Jaylen Brown gets traded, does not get traded, gets a supermax, or gets a disrespectful offer and doesn't get offered the supermax. What plays out there?
Yeah, I think I think they're going to give him the full supermax offer. I just think that's the easiest path forward, and then it'll be let tomorrow's problems be tomorrow's problems. Like, we'll figure those out down the line. I think there's a belief, even at $50 million a year, which is where that would ultimately land out to, he's still tradable. Like we can still make a trade. It's not going to be anything that'll kill us. And from his side, anything less than the supermax, unless they can really come together on, hey, we're going to go slightly less than the max, but we're still going to give you the 5 years. But it's because we need the flexibility to do X, Y, and Z. Maybe, but he took less last time. Because it was a lot of the last time was, hey, we're going to save it for Jason Tatum. And that was, all right, I get it. But he also wasn't an all NBA player when he signed that one. He was, a guy coming off a year where he'd come off the bench most of the year. So I think, supermax and let tomorrow's problems be tomorrow's problems, and you'll figure it out down the line. But I think that's where it probably goes. But I've said this over and over again. If they offer him the supermax without any kind of conditions attached, right? Just, here it is, everything we can give you, and he says no, then the answer has to be trade, right? Because that is one player. Kawhi Leonard turned it down, and he turned it down because he wanted to be traded. So we just need to get into a spot where it turns into, all right, let's go, we're right in the right kind of way there to move things into a spot where it is, all right, we're going to rebuild everything around Tatum. Not rebuild, retool, I guess is a better way to put it, but we're going to go in that direction.
All right, Keith, man. I could throw questions at you all day. I know Omari could. We got a bunch. It's everybody in the chat. We apologize. We couldn't. There's no way we could get to everything. Keith has a life outside of this, but you're the best, man. Like, we appreciate you so much. You are a friend of the podcast, and we appreciate anytime you make time. I really hope you make it out to Vegas, and I would love just to be able to sit down and talk hoops with you for however long. Get a chance. And again, I know Omari would as well. Thank you again, guys. If you don't already listen, if you're not subscribed, the Front Office Show, Keith, I'll let you do it. Let them know where they can find you.
Yeah, if we didn't get to your specific Pistons questions, pop in Front Office Fridays. Every Friday, we do a live show just like this, where it's live, and we record it for the podcast version later. But pop in and ask your questions there. We don't get a lot of Pistons questions, so we'd love to see some Pistons fans show up there. It's usually around 1 Eastern. So if you're running out the clock on the work day and schedule a conference call or something and close your office door and sit down and spend an hour with us. We have a lot of fun over there. We do full deal. Front Office Friday is also meant to be fun Friday too, so we tend to go off the rails every once in a while and have a lot of fun, but we have a really good time, Trevor Lane and I, on Front Office Show. And then the other days of the week we're recording all the latest news and notes around the NBA, and this is kind of our time to shine. This is heading into free agency, so we're a ton of free agency previews coming out for teams, players, positions, all that sort of stuff. And then we do live shows throughout the course of free agency as well, where we're live. For example, just to because we did it and it was crazy how many people watched it, but we broke down the Kevin Durant trade when it happened live at like 2:30 in the morning, and we had 5,000 people watching live at 2:30 in the morning, which is still bananas, and I don't know why that happened the way it happened, but it was a lot of fun. So we do all that sort of stuff too.
Everybody, awesome. Check out the Front Office Show. Check out Front Office Fridays. Keith Smith works harder at this than pretty much everybody. I mean, he is such an excellent resource for any, CBA matters or just NBA in general. So check out his podcast. Check out Front Office Fridays if you have any questions about the Pistons, because Pistons fans should have more of a national profile anyway, right? Go ahead and get those questions in. Keith's willing to help and support his podcast as well. Keith, it's always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us this Sunday. We appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, now we'll go ahead and close this out. So big thanks to our executive producer, Algedet Delgado, sports editor Kirkland Crawford, of course, our audio producer Robin Chan, and always shout out to Wes Davenport, and we'll talk to you all next week.